We now come to the statements, in which I will call the Home Secretary. Home Secretary Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the United Kingdom's approach to the global migration challenge. The United Kingdom has a long and proud history of offering sanctuary to refugees. In recent years alone, we have welcomed more than 185,000 people through safe and legal routes, including from Syria, Hong Kong, Afghanistan, and more recently, Ukraine. In addition, we have welcomed more than 40,000 people in recent years through our refugee family reunion routes. This government has done more than any other in recent history to support those fleeing persecution, conflict or instability. But we cannot focus our support on those who need it most or effectively control our borders without tackling illegal migration, which, Mr. Speaker, is facilitated by people smugglers, serious organised criminals that profit from human misery, who do not care about people drowning in the Channel or suffocating in the back of containers. We must break their lethal and evil business model by removing the demand for their repugnant activities. This type of illegal migration puts unsustainable pressures on our public services and local communities. Every day, the broken asylum system costs the taxpayer almost £5 million in hotel accommodation alone. The cost of the asylum system is the highest in over 2 decades, at over £1.5 billion. And as the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, said last week, we cannot sustain a parallel illegal system. Our compassion may be infinite, but our capacity to help people is not. But this is why the new plan for immigration and its legislative vehicle, the Nationality and Borders Bill, are so vital. And once again, I urge honourable members, but also members in the other place, to follow this elected House in backing the bill. At the heart of this government's approach is a simple principle, Mr. Speaker: fairness. Access to the UK's asylum system should be based on need, not on the ability to pay people smugglers. Mr. Speaker, more than 80 million people around the world are displaced. Others are on the move because they want a better life. There is a global migration crisis that demands innovative and international solutions, and this government is taking firm action. When I published the new plan for immigration back in March last year, we set out 3 very clear objectives: to increase the fairness and efficacy of our system so that we can better protect and support those in genuine need of asylum; to deter illegal and dangerous routes of entry to the UK, thereby breaking the business model of criminal smuggling networks and protecting the lives of those they endanger; and, Mr. Speaker, to remove more easily from the UK those with no right to be here. The Ministry of Defence has taken command of small boat operations in the Channel. Every small boat incident will be investigated to determine who piloted the boat and could therefore be liable for prosecution. These reforms are a truly cross-government effort, including the Home Office, the MOD, the Crown Prosecution Service, Border Force and the Ministry of Justice. A nationwide dispersal system will be introduced so that asylum pressures more equally spread across local authorities. Currently, 53% of local authorities in England, Scotland and Wales do not accommodate asylum seekers under the dispersal system. It is simply unfair that a national burden should be felt disproportionately by certain areas of the country. For the first time, Mr. Speaker, the government is building asylum reception centres to end the practice of housing asylum seekers in expensive hotels. A new reception centre in Linton-upon-Ouse in North Yorkshire will open shortly. Far from being outlandish, as some of the opposition have commented, asylum reception centres are already operational in safe EU countries, such as Greece, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, they're funded by the EU. And just last week, I signed a new world-leading migration and economic development partnership with Rwanda. Under this partnership, those who travel to the UK by illegal and dangerous routes, including by small boats across the Channel, may be relocated to Rwanda, where they will have their asylum claims considered. Those in need of protection will be given up to 5 years of support, including education and employment training, help with integration, accommodation, healthcare, so that they can thrive there, Mr. Speaker. The UK is supporting this investment in Rwanda over 5 years, boosting the Rwandan economy and increasing the opportunities of people living there, further cementing the trading and diplomatic relationship between our countries. Mr. Speaker, this is a bespoke international agreement reached last week with Rwanda. I came to Parliament as soon as was reasonably practical following the conclusion of that agreement. This agreement is comparable with all our domestic and international legal obligations. Rwanda is a state party to the 1951 United Nations Refugee Convention and the 7 core United Nations Human Rights Convention, and has a strong system for refugee resettlement. The United Nations has used Rwanda for several years to relocate refugees, Mr. Speaker. And, of course, Mr. Speaker, it was the European Union who first funded this. This agreement deals a major blow to the people smugglers and their evil trade in human cargo. Everyone who is considered for relocation will be screened and interviewed, including an age assessment, and have access to legal services. Mr. Speaker, in relation to accounting officer advice, contrary to reports in the newspapers, the Permanent Secretary did not oppose this agreement nor assert that it is poor value for money. Rather, he stated in his role as accounting officer that the policy is regular, proper and feasible, but there is not currently sufficient evidence to demonstrate value for money. It is the job of ministers to take decisions, Mr. Speaker, and it is the job of ministers, Mr. Speaker, more often than not, to take tough decisions in the interest of our country. Existing approaches, Mr. Speaker, have failed, and there is no one single solution to tackle these problems, something that I think the benches opposite may have encountered in the past as well. Change is needed because people are dying attempting to come to the UK on illegal and dangerous routes. This partnership is a type of international cooperation needed to make the global immigration system fairer, keep people safe and give them opportunities to flourish. This will help break the people smugglers' business model and prevent the loss of life while ensuring protection for those who are genuinely vulnerable. This government is delivering the first comprehensive overhaul of the asylum system and this type of illegal migration in decades. At the heart of this approach, Mr. Speaker, is fairness. Access to the UK's asylum system must be based on need, not the ability to pay people smugglers. And the demands on the current system, the cost of British taxpayers and the scandalous abuses are increasing. The British public have rightly had enough. Our new plan for immigration will improve and support those directly fleeing oppression, persecution and tyranny through safe and legal routes. It will deter illegal and dangerous routes of entry to the UK, make it easier to remove those with no right to be in the UK, and, Mr. Speaker, provide a common-sense approach to controlling immigration, both legal and illegal. I commend the statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've seen over the last week, Mr. Speaker, this unworkable, shameful and desperate attempt to distract from the Prime Minister's law-breaking that the Home Secretary should not go along with because she is undermining not just respect for the rule of law, but also her office by providing cover for him. The policies that she has announced today are unworkable, unethical and extortionate in the cost for the British taxpayer. There's no information from the Home Secretary about the costs today. Will she admit the 120 million she's announced doesn't pay for a single person to be transferred? She hasn't actually got an agreement on the price for each person. In fact, the £120 million is the eye-watering price the Home Office is paying just for a press release. So what's the rest of the cost? What is this year's budget? How many people will it cover? The Home Office has briefed it might be £30,000 per person to cover up to 3 months' accommodation, but that is already 3 times more than the ordinary cost of dealing with an asylum case in the UK. And her statement says she's going to provide 5 years of cost. Well, in Australia, offshoring costs £1.7 million per person. That is over 100 times more than the ordinary asylum cost from here. So where is all the money going to come from in order to fund this plan? She says she's going to save money on hotels, but the only reason we're paying a fortune in hotel costs is because the Home Office decision-making has totally collapsed. On her watch, Home Office are only taking 14,000 initial asylum decisions a year. That is half what they were doing 5 years ago, half. Taking fewer decisions than Belgium, Netherlands, Austria, never mind France and Germany. So the costs to the UK taxpayer have soared by hundreds of millions of pounds because she isn't capable of taking the basic asylum decisions. And because she's not capable of taking those decisions, she is trying to pay Rwanda to take those decisions instead. Whether people are refugees or not, whether they are victims of modern slavery or not, whether they have family in the UK, whether they've come from Afghanistan, Syria or even Ukraine. She is asking them to do the job that she is not capable of. She says it will deter boats and traffickers, but the Permanent Secretary says otherwise. He says there's no evidence of a deterrent effect, and there has been a total failure to crack down on criminal gangs that are at the heart of this problem. The prosecutions for human trafficking, for non-sexual exploitation, are down from 59 in 2015 to just 2 in 2020. Just 2. Well, the criminals won't be deterred because someone they exploited was sent to Rwanda. They don't give money-back guarantees, which means they lose money if their victims end up somewhere else instead. They will just spin more lies, and she is totally failing to crack down on those criminal gangs. So why not get on with her basic job instead? Properly crack down on human traffickers. Do the serious work with France and Belgium to prevent the boats setting off instead. She didn't even mention in this statement, and make decisions fast. The Home Secretary is just using this policy to distract from years of failure. She promised 3 years ago to halve the number of crossings, and instead they have increased tenfold. And this will make it worse for trafficking. The top police chief and modern slavery commissioner has said her legislation will make it harder to prosecute traffickers. When Israel tried paying Rwanda to take refugees and asylum seekers a few years ago, independent reports showed it increased people smuggling and increased the action of the criminal gangs. And that is the damage she is doing. She is making it easier for the criminal gangs and harder for those who need support. At a time when people across our country have come forward to help those who are fleeing Ukraine, to help desperate refugees, instead of working properly with other countries, the Home Secretary is doing the opposite. All she is doing is making it easier for the criminal gangs. So will she tell us the facts, the real costs of this policy, the real damage it's going to do to human trafficking and people smugglers, and come clean with the public and come clean with the House?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I should just say that response was just somewhat wholly predictable, if I may say so. And I think it's important just to say to everyone in the House right now, you cannot put a price on saving human lives. And I think everyone will respect that completely. And, Mr. Speaker, if I may, the Honourable Lady was a minister in the Blair government when the powers that have given this government to undertake the legal basis of this policy were introduced back then. And I don't remember the current Home Secretary, Shadow Home Secretary, exploding in this synthetic rage when she occupied a seat in the Blair government, when all those policies were put in action. And those, Mr. Speaker, were acts passed in 1999, 2002, 2004 for partnerships in this similar way. By the way, the same partnerships and that were used to put in place the Dublin regulations to return inadmissible asylum seekers to EU member states. And of course, the Honourable Lady has gone on the record multiple times to attack the government for leaving those regulations, while at the same time calling for a replacement to be put in place. Now she's attacking the government for using the very powers that only a few weeks ago she was saying that we still could be using if we hadn't left the EU. I think, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, what we've seen today from the party opposite and from the Honourable Lady is, quite frankly, their absolute inability to understand this issue, this differentiation between legal migration and illegal migration. They should be honest about their policies. Their position is to stand for open borders and uncontrolled immigration. And, Mr. Speaker, if I may just go even further, I mean, she speaks about the policy being unworkable and then extortionate. Well, if the policy is unworkable, it can't then be extortionate because we'll be making payments based on delivery. And this is the point about our scheme, that there is nothing that she has said today that actually puts an alternative forward, that actually seeks to deal with the issue of people trafficking, deaths in the Channel, and importantly, I think the Labour Party are being exposed today for having no policy, no idea as to stop people smuggling.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say, with respect to my right honourable friend, that from what I have heard and seen so far of this policy, I do not support the removal to Rwanda policy on the grounds of legality, practicality and efficacy. But I want to ask her about one very specific issue. I understand that those who will be removed will only be young men, that families will not be... well, the Home Secretary is shaking her head, so I've obviously misunderstood the policy in that sense. But if it is the case that families will not be broken up, and the Home Secretary is nodding, does she not believe, and where is her evidence, that this will not simply lead to an increase in the trafficking of women and children?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to meet with the Right Honourable Lady to discuss this further and actually give her further information on this. No, actually calm down and listen. I think first and foremost, just on the policy is legal and there's been a published MOU that speaks very, very clearly, well, you're not even listening, so there's no point to it. That spells out the MOU very clearly in terms of the legal, if you're interested in listening to responses, then please do, that there is an MOU that has been published which spells out in full detail the legalities but also the nature of the agreement. Now, I think the Right Honourable Lady would respect the fact that I'm not going to come to the floor of the House and speak about the eligibility criteria, because she will know, because actually, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will know very, very well that actually it's that type of criteria that is used by the smuggling gangs to then effectively exploit various loopholes in our existing laws when it comes to various issues such as legal action that is undertaken to prevent removals, some of which, if I may, Mr. Speaker, just add, there are many members opposite that write letters to me frequently to say, please don't remove some of the failed asylum seekers, but also foreign national offenders, people that have actually got no legal basis to remain in our country. But I'll be happy to meet with the Right Honourable Lady on
Spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a cruel and a catastrophic policy. It will not hurt smugglers, but will further seriously harm people who have fled persecution. It will do untold damage to the international system of refugee protection and to what little remains of the UK's reputation for upholding international law. Mr. Speaker, this is worse than temporary offshoring. It is offloading of responsibility altogether. As the UNHCR has said, people fleeing persecution should not be treated like commodities. And in the words of the Refugee Council, this is nothing short of cash for deportations. 85% of refugees are in developing or the least developed countries already. Here is a wealthy UK offering cash to take some more. So much for global Britain. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that's transparent about this policy is its dodgy timing and grubby political motivation. So, in the interests of proper transparency, will she finally publish a detailed estimate of how many billions this policy will cost? She was chuntering that she had the deal all sorted out. She can now announce it to members of this House. And for what are we paying this money? Can she say what percentage of asylum seekers coming to the UK will be subjected to this abysmal treatment? Reports from Rwanda suggest capacity probably around 1%, but certainly less than 5%. Is that correct? We are told that people will be screened before transfer, but how can a pathetic screening interview possibly pick out trafficking survivors or torture victims or LGBT people? Quite simply, it can't. So is she happy to see these people subjected to this treatment? And why are women and children within the scope of this policy? And will people going through that screening process be able to access legal advice?
Oh, yeah, I doubt it.
Mr. Speaker, why aren't we allowed to see the criteria for deciding who will be sent? Where is the transparency in that? And how will she monitor their treatment? Her government has completely failed to stop abuses in UK detention centres, never mind centres that are 5,000 miles away. So, Mr. Speaker, in short, this disastrous policy has nothing to do with the global migration crisis. It has everything to do with distracting from the PM's political crises, and it is absolutely sickening for all of that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just for the record, I actually think the honourable gentleman's latter comment was absolutely unacceptable. And actually, if I may, it does a great disservice, not just to members, not just to this government and officials that have worked for over 9 months on this partnership, but also to our counterparts in the world in Rwanda that have been working with us, and many of my own international counterparts as well, that are working collectively together to tackle issues of illegal migration, and if I may say so, some counterparts in the EU as well. And if I may, just to answer some very, very specific points, I think it is shameful that he is playing party political games on that point, just like the party opposite as well. No, absolutely not. If you want to let me answer the question and finish, I will. I think the other point to make, Mr. Speaker, is that Rwanda actually is home to resettling over 130,000 refugees, and they have done that successfully. And if I may, I think your comments are a slur to the successful efforts of our partners in Rwanda. Rwanda is a safe and secure country with the respect for the rule of law. And no, absolutely not. I actually think members should just listen to the undercurrent of their tone towards the country of Rwanda, which has done a great deal to provide safety and refuge and security and a new life to many, many refugees around the world. He asked about the approach that would be taken. Everyone considered for relocation will be screened, interviewed and have access to legal advice. Decisions are made on a case-by-case basis, and nobody will be removed if it's unsafe or inappropriate for them at all. Now, I also, if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to conclude by making another point as well, because he is not the first honourable member to mention legal obligations and the legalities of this. Rwanda, like us, is beholden to the same legal obligations as the United Kingdom on human rights. And if I may, I just want to make the point again. I think there is something really, really quite unpleasant about the undercurrent of the tone that is taken to Rwanda from policy.
Gary Sambro.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear. In latest figures suggested, Mr. Speaker, in Birmingham, over 7,000 people in December were claiming asylum support, amounting to tens of millions of pounds. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that this plan and partnership with Rwanda will reduce the reliance on hotels and bring down small boat crossings?
Oh, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I think actually there are a number of things. If the honourable lady wants to be less hysterical and actually listen, she might actually learn something about the new plan for immigration. I think it is important to reflect, Mr. Speaker, on a number of points. The answer to my honourable friend is absolutely yes, because we do not want people in hotel accommodation. And of course, it's a cheap point for the opposition benches to make, but with the pandemic, we absolutely had to use hotel accommodation as part of dispersal to actually keep people protected during the pandemic. That was a fact, and Public Health England guidance spoke to that. And of course, on decision-making, yes, of course, and on decision-making, if you choose to listen. That's exactly what the new plan for immigration is about, in terms of speeding up asylum decision-making and processing with this legislation and digitalisation of the system. And I have to add, Mr. Speaker, of course, every single member on the opposite benches have voted against this policy. They clearly want open borders. They just want to have uncontrolled migration, and they've done nothing themselves to come up with an alternative plan on this issue.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Dinah Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, the announcement made last week when Parliament wasn't sitting has caused a great deal of confusion around what this policy actually entails. Unfortunately, the Home Secretary turned her head away from the microphone when she was responding to the Right Honourable Lady for Maidenhead. So I wonder if the Home Secretary could answer the question about who would actually be eligible to be sent to Rwanda. Is it going to be single young men? Is it going to be women and children? And what percentage of asylum seekers does the Home Secretary think will be sent to Rwanda?
Mr. Speaker, just on the on eligibility, as I have already said, everyone considered for relocation will be screened, interviewed, have the right access to legal advice and services, and decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis. That is absolutely right and proper. proper. But there is also the fundamental principle right now in relation to this policy and the new plan for immigration, which I'm sure she is well versed in, is that this will apply to people that are inadmissible to our asylum system and people that have come to our country illegally through illegal and dangerous routes.
Kevin Hollingray.
Mr. Speaker, the asylum reception centre my right one friend refers to is situated in my constituency of Linton and Ouse. Not a NIMBY in any shape or form, but nevertheless this is a small rural village. It is the RAF base it's going to be situated on is right in the centre of that village. There are understandable concerns from local people that this is not the appropriate place to put such a reception centre. Would my right honourable friend meet with me to discuss the decision and see what can be done?
Absolutely. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank my honourable friend as well, because he has been in dialogue with ministers on this issue. I'd be very, very happy to meet with him. And of course, he does understand the principle behind all of this. So I'm very happy to discuss this with him further.
Dan Abbott.
The Home Secretary asserts that Labour members do not understand the issue, but she will be aware that a former permanent secretary at the Home Office, Sir David Normington, said last week about her Rwanda policy that it's inhumane, it's morally reprehensible, it's probably unlawful, and it may well be unworkable. How does she come to know better than a former Home Office Permanent Secretary?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, if I may tell the Right Honourable Lady, I'm surprised the Right Honourable Lady is using Sir David's name in vain, given it was also a former Labour Home Secretary who infamously and discourteously described the Home Office leadership and management at the time as not fit for purpose during Sir David's tenure. If I may, things have moved on in terms of the asylum in terms of the asylum system right now, which is why the new plan for immigration, which her party and members on the opposite benches continuously vote against, have no plan to deal with these important and difficult issues, and at the same time will bring in the reform that our country needs, while making sure that we preserve the efficacy of safe and legal routes for people that are fleeing persecution to come to our country and get the support that they need.
Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend deserves great personal credit for seeking to tackle this dreadful crisis which exists in the Channel. But will she accept that many of us have grave concerns that the policy she has announced simply will not work? On the subject of cost, can she confirm that she will not be using expensive military aircraft to make this 9,000-mile round trip? And on the subject of cost also, will she ensure, before the House of Commons votes on this matter tomorrow, that we know the cost per asylum seeker of those she is sending to Rwanda?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, right honourable friend, who knows Rwanda as a country incredibly well, if I may say so, and we've had many discussions in the past about Rwanda. I'm very happy to meet with him and have further discussions with him as well. We will not be using military planes for any removals, but he will also, and actually many members of this House will be pretty familiar with the approach that we do take to removing failed asylum seekers and foreign national offenders, to either returning them to their country of origin or to third countries. There is a whole process around this, which is, a lot of operational work and details that take place. So I'm happy to talk to him privately about that, because these are complicated ways in which we can do this. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman makes further points that I'm very happy to discuss with him as well.
Live effort.
Mr. Speaker, can the Home Secretary say whether she's negotiated a cap on the cost of this arrangement with Rwanda? What will be the cost per person sent, and whether there's a limit on that cost? Yeah. If so, what is it?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of costs, as I've already published and said, there is an upfront £120 million development cost. And with that, of course, when we remove people, payments will be made accordingly, only once we've removed people to Rwanda.
Dame Andrew Lenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm incredibly proud of this country and this government's track record in providing safe welcome to over 185,000 asylum seekers and refugees since 2015. And I do hope my right honourable friend will be ramping up the welcome for Ukrainian refugees. I know she'll be working flat out at it. But what I do find absolutely abhorrent and inexplicable is the way that many on the opposition benches, and in fact even in the top echelons of the Church of England and in other faiths, who have completely forgotten the images of children lying drowned on our beaches. How can they not seek to try and remedy that appalling situation? These people are not refugees and asylum seekers. They are coming from France.
I thank my right honourable friend for her comments and observations. And first of all, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will be very, very well aware of the work that our noble friend Lord Harrington is doing in the other place on the Ukrainian scheme right now, in terms of resettling and bringing people over for the Homes to Ukraine scheme. If I may, Mr. Speaker, the left in particular, they like to preach compassion, but there is little compassion when they do not have the backbone to actually make difficult decisions when it comes to the protection of human life. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, for months and months and months, they talk about saving lives and lost lives. And now that there is the prospect for action to save lives and to go after the evil people smugglers, they wring their hands and they choose to play party political games.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members across this House are desperately concerned about the children who are often on these boats. So can we have a straight answer from the Home Secretary? Does she intend for one of the criteria to be that prevents somebody being sent to Rwanda to be being under 18? And crucially, where will the processing and the decision-making as to whether or not somebody is under 18 take place? Please, Home Secretary, be straight and honest with us what you intend to do with these children. We all deserve better.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I've already spoken about the processing and the eligibility. Yes, I have. I absolutely have. And operational decisions are for the officials and the practitioners on the ground that undertake them. And that is part of our process that she should respect.
Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Shadow Home Secretary was slightly wrong when she talked about human trafficking. This isn't human trafficking, this is people smuggling. This is where evil gangs are paid money to take people across the channel. They don't care about the lives of these individuals. And the only way you're going to stop the people smuggling is if you reduce the demand for it. And the Home Secretary's Rwanda policy is absolutely right. Would you agree with me that her policy is morally the right thing to do?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. There is a distinction and a significant difference between people trafficking and smuggling. It is the smuggling gangs, the people smuggling gangs that we are trying to stop. We are trying to break up their business model and end their evil trade, and it's absolutely right that we do so. And when it comes to cases of human trafficking, it is a well-known fact, and in fact it is down to the work of my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, and the work with the Modern Day Slavery Act, and the work of this government that actually has stood up the legalities and the proper processes to give those people that have been trafficked the legal protection and the safety and security that they need in our country.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Home Secretary tell the House how many people does she expect to send to Rwanda in the first 12 months of this scheme? She will be aware that Rwandan government ministers are on the record as saying that they expect their capacity to be in hundreds with a few thousand over the 5-year period. Given that 28,000 people crossed the Channel last year, does she really think that this scheme is going to have the deterrent effect she claims for it?
So his question is yes, and the scheme is uncapped, and that is exactly what we've negotiated with the Rwandan government.
David Davis.
The Home Secretary is quite properly focused on saving lives. So can I ask her a practical question? The World Bank has said that Rwanda is one of the highest incidences of malaria in the world. Our own government website warns travellers about hepatitis A and B, tetanus, typhoid, cholera and tuberculosis, not to mention rabies and dengue fever, which can't be vaccinated against. So what is the government going to do, both from an ethical and moral point of view, and to protect the British taxpayer against compensation claims, to protect the asylum seekers who go to Rwanda?
Well, my right honourable friend has made some important points, because the work that we've undertaken and the partnership with the Rwandan government is based on support directly to them, but also expertise, technical expertise in terms of resettlement, education, training, but also, as I reflected upon in my oral statement, Mr. Speaker, providing care in terms of the health and resettlement needs of those individuals.
Paula Barker.
Mr. Speaker, the proposal to treat refugees differently, purely based on how they arrived in the UK, undermines a key principle of refugee protection. Such an approach weakens the very foundation of the 1951 Refugee Convention and contradicts the steps the UK agreed to when signing up to the Global Compact on Refugees. So, what legal assurances did the government seek about protection of people in Rwanda, an authoritarian regime which has had one person in power for 30 years?
Well, I think, first of all, I've already been very clear that Rwanda is a safe country, and also people that are coming to our country are also coming to the United Kingdom illegally from safe countries, which is where people should claim asylum in the first place as well. I've already highlighted, Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Rwanda is not just a safe country, it's one that has resettled over 100,000 refugees. And if I may, I appreciate the Honourable Lady has just mentioned both the EU and EU countries as well. Both those bodies have deemed it safe to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Rwanda is beholden to the same legal obligations as the United Kingdom on human rights. And if I may, I will say it again, but I think her tone towards Rwanda is deeply, deeply offensive in light of the partnership relationship that we have.
Leslie Elphick. Deputy Speaker.
Does the Home Secretary agree with me that there is a moral as well as a financial responsibility to bring these small boats crossings to an end and save lives? And that is what this bold package of measures is seeking to do.
If I may, my honourable friend is absolutely right. And with that, of course, I do just want to pay tribute to the way in which she's been working with the Home Office as the Member of Parliament for Dover, that has been at the forefront of receiving people coming into the UK, but also her county council as well. They themselves have been under significant pressure for many, many years, which is why the dispersal policy, which was first proposed by Kent County Council, the leader of Kent County Council, that has taken time to be pushed forward, will make a significant impact for the people, the taxpayers of Kent, but also see going forward the principle of fairness being applied to people rightly who come to our country through legal routes, and the way in which we resettle people with no legal basis to be in the UK.
Janet Cherry.
Deputy Speaker, this afternoon the Home Secretary has described Rwanda as a safe and secure country and said that to say otherwise is a slur. But only last year, on at least 2 occasions at the United Nations, the United Kingdom called for an investigation into torture, deaths in custody, extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances in Rwanda. So my question for the Home Secretary is this: was that a slur? Was that a slur by the UK? Or was it a well-founded request? What was the outcome of the request? And what legal assurances has she obtained from Rwanda regarding the treatment of any asylum seekers who are sent there?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, under this agreement, as I have said and I'll repeat again, Rwanda will process claims in accordance with the UN Refugee Convention, national and international human rights laws, and importantly will ensure that individuals are resettled in the right way. And if I may, over 130,000 refugees have been resettled in Rwanda, which actually actually speaks to the fact that Rwanda is not just a safe country, but it's a safe country that has been recognised by UNHCR and the EU, both of whom have resettled individuals to Rwanda. The final point I'd make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that with all partnerships, well, if you would like to listen, I will answer the question, and I'm doing that. We have thorough discussions, and throughout the negotiations of this partnership as well, including on topics such as human rights, we've worked very closely with the Rwandan government, not just on this agreement, but fundamentally the need to protect vulnerable people seeking safety and seeking a new life.
Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary is right to deal with the issue of criminal people trafficking, and she's right also to recognise the frustration of many people at the length of time it takes to remove people unlawfully from this country. The caveat that many of us have, however, is as to whether or not this scheme will actually achieve either of those objectives. Can my right honourable friend help me as to how she works, how she can assume that a set of criteria to determine a claim, as clearly must be done, is likely to be free from legal challenge if the criteria are not published and transparently available? And given that, would it not be much better to invest the significant amounts of money that we're talking about in speeding up the working of our current immigration system, the recruitment of more immigration tribunal judges and more investigative material resource for the Home Office, so that we can then do it without the financial and potential legal risks that the current scheme involves?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may say in response to my right honourable friend, we are doing both. And he will know that the legislation for the new plan for immigration does exactly that, in introducing the one-stop shop in terms of immigration courts and tribunals, stopping the merry-go-round where various legal practices are used to prevent the removal of individuals with no legal right to be in the United Kingdom, the constant right of appeal in the immigration courts, which actually slows down cases from being processed. That is the purpose of the new plan for immigration. There are clauses in the Nationality and Borders Bill which, Madam Deputy Speaker, I repeat again for the benefit of the House, the entire benches on the opposition have voted against because they do not want to see the issue of illegal migration, reform to the asylum system being addressed at all. And these are many of the challenges that we have to face and confronted with every single day.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the basis of what evidence has the Home Secretary concluded that this policy, forcing some asylum seekers onto planes to Rwanda, is actually going to have a deterrent effect on the number of people getting into boats to cross the channel?
Home Secretary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've already alluded to this in my statement earlier. And the fact of the matter is, this is exactly what is required to break up the evil people smuggling gangs, to bring in the deterrent effect, alongside I have been very, very clear, there is no one single solution. And quite frankly, the benches opposite can scream hysterically as much as they want. They themselves do not have a plan. They themselves have supported for decades uncontrolled migration through whatever routes. There is a degree of dishonesty now with the British public at a time when we could come together to support proposals, and now we do have proposals through the Nationality and Borders Bill and a safe third country, which many were calling for through the various debates in this House as the Nationality and Borders Bill went through this House and in the other place as well. Now they just wring their hands and just typically just oppose any option, any solution that could make a difference.
Lee Anderson.
We can see, Madam Deputy Speaker, by the level of questions coming from the opposition, especially the Labour Party today, they are completely out of touch with the British public. But in the interest of safety, can the Home Secretary please confirm that if anybody doesn't want to go to Rwanda, they can actually claim asylum in France?
Madam Deputy Speaker, France is a safe country.
Karen Buck.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary has been pressed several times on the issue of who will and who will not be liable to be included in this scheme, and specifically whether it will include women, whether it will include children. She has refused to do so despite being asked by the Chair of the Home Affairs Committee by the former Prime Minister. If she knows how many people she believes will be included in this scheme over the coming months, surely she knows what the criteria will be, and if so, is it not her duty to inform this House of that?
Yeah. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made this point several times about those who are inadmissible to the asylum system, which are those that come to our country through illegal routes. We've made it abundantly clear time and time again that we are bringing in these reforms. We are bringing in these reforms to stop this illegal trade in people smuggling by creating safe and legal routes, exactly the type of safe and legal routes for women and children and families, so that they do not have to be put in the hands of the evil people smugglers. And we will absolutely, as I've said, consider everyone for relocation through the process that I've outlined on a case-by-case basis, and no one will be sent to the third country if it's unsafe or inappropriate for them.
Alan Cairns.
Madam Deputy Speaker, asylum is sought by some of the world's most desperate people fleeing some of the most horrendous sorts of crimes. But sadly, this process is abused by so many people traffickers, exploiting the vulnerability of the people that I've highlighted. What reassurance can my right honourable friend give that she will continue to develop safe and legal routes for some of those people who have been left in refugee camps around the world for so many years?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, my right honourable friend makes the most important point around safe and legal routes. And as I announced and spoke in my statement earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have resettled over 180,000 people through safe and legal routes, more than any government in recent years. And that is routes including Syria, Afghanistan, Hong Kong and now Ukraine. We will continue to do exactly that. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, just conclude by saying, I've said in the House on a number of occasions that when it comes to safe and legal routes, they should be bespoke, because every single crisis is unique, and it's right that we work with the right international partners to make sure that we provide safety and security for those fleeing persecution and oppression.
Tony Lloyd.
Deputy Speaker, the Home Secretary will know that Israel introduced a very similar scheme, seemingly similar scheme to this, and then abandoned it. Can the Secretary of State tell us precisely why she believes that failed and what she puts forward will succeed?
Well, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can't comment on the schemes of other countries when they're not comparable to what the British government is doing. But this is a different partnership. This is a migration and economic development partnership. It is not comparable to those of other countries that he's referred to.
Speaker, I know the Home Secretary has worked tirelessly with our European partners to try and stop vile people smugglers, but it is evident more measures are urgently needed. Does she agree with me that a fair and just immigration policy and asylum policy should not rely on your ability to pay, nor should it rely on whether you're young enough or fit enough to attempt to jump the queue by making these journeys, and that to oppose any measure to stop these people smugglers is immoral?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I think, quite frankly, when we see the scale of not just the global migration challenge, but also the level of criminality that has been associated with migration and illegal migration for decades, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is not a new phenomenon, as I've repeatedly said in the House many, many times. It is right that we go to many of the source countries. It is right that we absolutely go after the individuals who are responsible for this trade in people smuggling, that we go after them and we stop these routes from being viable. And Madam Deputy Speaker, we can't do this on our own. We have to work internationally with our partners, partners in the EU, but other international partners as well, who do want to step up, who do want to be part of the solution, and also demonstrate to other countries around the world how we can resettle refugees in a good, proper way.
Dame Meg Hillier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Permanent Secretary at the Home Office concluded that he couldn't tell if this was value for money. But on every number and every question of cost, the Home Secretary has failed to answer. But can she answer the point made by the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Maidenhead? If this deters certain people from crossing, Surely the people traffickers and the smugglers will just load those dinghies up with women and children and make sure that they get their money somehow. It does not break the business model.
Well, I'm sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker, but if I may, I do want to dispute that point. It is our moral responsibility and duty not to wring our hands and just let the people smugglers carry on trading in human misery. We have a responsibility, Madam Deputy Speaker, to find solutions. It is disappointing, though, as I've repeatedly said, that the opposition will just sit on the sidelines, cart from the sidelines, play political games. The message to the British people is obviously they just want uncontrolled immigration. They don't have solutions to this problem, and they're not prepared to work with the government to actually stop this awful and evil trade in people smuggling.
Desmond Sway.
Has she a plan to prevent potential emigrants from absconding before we can get them to Rwanda?
Well, it's an important point, Madam Deputy Speaker, and of course there is a lot of work that takes place with immigration enforcement and also our operational teams. I should just add, Madam Deputy Speaker, that for those that go through the asylum process, whose claims are processed in the United Kingdom, issues such as absconding will have an impact on how their asylum claim is viewed and treated.
Hammy Wilson.
Deputy Speaker, I suspect that there are more asylum seekers housed in my constituency than in the constituency of many who have been hectoring the Secretary of State this afternoon. And I've heard their stories, and I know the misery which is caused by people trafficking and the desperation of those who hand over huge amounts of money and risk their lives to get into the United Kingdom. And therefore I do support the Secretary of State's aim and object to wreck this evil trade. But the question I want to ask is this: Secretary of State, if there is a lengthy processing procedure, and if at the end of that a very small percentage of those who are processed are actually left the country, do the people smugglers still not have an argument that it is worth your while handing over money to us and risking your lives?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What I'd say in response to the honourable gentleman, there are a number of points that he's made, and he's made them incredibly well, actually, about the human misery and the way in which people's lives are put at risk is absolutely shocking and it's tragic. We want to stop that and break that, and we have to do that upstream, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's not good enough to wait for it to come to the shores of the United Kingdom or to the coastline of France. It is simply too late, and that is why there is a whole array of work taking place, and has been redoubled now, working with intelligence and security partners upstream and with different governments as well, so that we can target those gangs, intercept those gangs, and also prosecute them, not just in our country, but actually in other countries further upstream.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and a new plan for immigration. Does she agree with me that there is nothing moral at all about allowing a system that perpetuates evil people smuggling, or indeed one that puts disproportionate burden on constituencies such as my own in terms of temporarily housing migrants?
My friend is absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I come back to the point, 2 points in particular, around the issue of criminal gangs, people smuggling. This is not a new phenomenon, it is well established, and we have to work with our international partners to absolutely break this model up and have the right level of prosecutions domestically, but also work with our counterparts on intelligence and intelligence sharing and prosecutions outside of the United Kingdom. Much of that is in the new plan for immigration, much of that is in the National Anti-Borders Bill, which this side of the House absolutely supports, that side of the House does not. And he's absolutely right in the whole principle of local authorities as well. It is unfair, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it's a handful of local authorities across the United Kingdom and England and Wales that have stood up to provide housing accommodation to meet the needs of asylum seekers. And I just think it's a shameful reflection on many of those local authorities, which will now be remedied through the dispersal policy.
Janet Davey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I cannot accept that the Secretary of State believes that this policy is about protecting people, when we all know across
this chamber that this policy is utterly harmful. The Archbishops of Canterbury and York were right for speaking out against the government's plan to send in those asylum seekers and refugees to Rwanda. The government's language is one of criminalising vulnerable and traumatised people. The Bishop of York was right to say there is in law no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. It is the people who exploit them that we need to crack down on. This policy will also cost the UK taxpayer billions of pounds, as we have seen in Australia. Isn't that correct?
Home Secretary.
Well, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hear her case, but doing nothing is not an option when people are dying in the Channel.
Sir Edward Lee.
Following that question, is not the, quote, ungodly thing to do is to do nothing and have a mass drowning of children in the Channel this winter? And given that there is no end of people who want to cross the Channel, however many we let in legally, isn't it morally incumbent on those who oppose this policy to explain to the House now how they are going to break the business model that once you get here, you are put in a hotel and you are never sent back?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Isn't the moral requirement for the Home Secretary to explain why she will deport people who've arrived in this country fleeing from desperate wars, famine and problems, and prepared to risk all to cross a dangerous sea? Don't they deserve a sense of humanity from the Home Secretary not to be deported to incarceration in Rwanda?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, again, I refer to the tone that the Right Honourable Gentleman is using to our partners in Rwanda, which I think, quite frankly, is quite questionable. But I would like to remind the Right Honourable Gentleman and all members of this House that France is a safe country, alongside many of the EU member states, that those that are travelling to the United Kingdom through illegal and dangerous crossings where their lives are put at risk, which is what we are trying to stop, they could and should claim asylum in those countries first of all.
David Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome much of what has been said today, but I'd like to ask my right honourable friend, given that 3/4 of child asylum seekers that come to the UK are boys aged 16 or 17, what assurance can she give me that the age assessment process will have been fully completed before they become eligible for removal from the United Kingdom?
Home Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for his very sensible question. And the House will be very well aware of the new age assessment work that will be put together and come forward, basically, through the Nationality and Borders Bill. This is an important piece of work which will effectively help to bring greater efficacy to the asylum system and support local authorities as well in determining the age of young people claiming asylum. Because for too long we have had some of the most egregious abuses where we've had young men masquerading as children and posing as a safeguarding threat in our schools and also in social services. So this is important work and serious work that is taking place right now, which will provide everyone the assurance around the age of those youngsters who are coming to our country and claiming asylum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has been repeatedly asked this afternoon about the costs of this totally wrong policy. She said that she knew from examples of our existing removal schemes the costs that are involved in chartering aircraft. So can she tell us today what will be the cost of chartering one return aircraft to Rwanda? What will be the cost per one person deported? And will she admit that this will cost far in excess of the 120 million that she said was just for development costs?
Well, first of all, the honourable gentleman is absolutely wrong. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, in terms of the costs of removal of individuals, I think for the record it's just worth reflecting upon the number of members on the opposite benches that frequently write to me, Madam Deputy Speaker, to stop the removal of individuals with no legal basis to be in the country when we are chartering those planes to remove failed asylum seekers and foreign national offenders offenders, and those costs, Madam Deputy Speaker, are marginal compared to the long-term costs of housing people with no legal basis in this country, and the wider costs to society are public services, healthcare, and also housing and wider accommodation.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I commend my right honourable friend on the proposals she's announced today, which offer the real prospect of breaking the business model of the people smugglers. And is it not the case that if anyone should be coming in for criticism, whether from this side of the Thames or the other, it should be those who are plying that disgusting trade and not those who are seeking to disrupt it?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think also there's a moment of reflection for all colleagues right now when it comes to those that actually thwart the removal of those with no legal basis to be in the country, and also the cost to the British taxpayer, the cost to the public purse of hard-pressed British taxpayers of not removing those individuals from this country in the first place.
Savile Roberts.
Global Britain used to be a byword for bad trade deals. Now it's an excuse to outsource our asylum system to Rwanda. Yeah. Of course, we all stand, don't we, with the people of Ukraine in their fight to repel one dictator. But the Home Secretary is yoking the UK's reputation to another.
You're here.
Welsh and Scottish governments have long asked for talks on a solution on the establishment of safe routes for refugees. Did she engage with those two governments, or does she only talk with dictators?
If I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the Right Honourable Lady will be very, very well aware of the engagement that's taken place in government around our safe and legal route for Ukrainian nationals coming over to the United Kingdom, and those discussions have taken place across the devolved administration. I should also just say, for the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the number of people that have come to our country through safe and legal routes stands at over 180,000 right now. Global Britain is doing more than its fair share in the world. We're leading the world when it comes to safe and legal routes. And if I may just finally conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, when it comes to safe and legal routes, it is the Honourable Lady's party and all the party opposite, every party opposite actually, on the opposite benches, that have voted against the Nationality and Borders Bill, which actually puts into statute safe and legal routes.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend has highlighted the opening of a reception centre at the former RAF base at Linton-on-Ouse, located, of course, between Harrogate and York. Can she give us a bit more information about that? For example, when might it open, what might be its capacity, and how many local jobs will be created?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm that the centre will be opening literally in the next 6 weeks. There has been work was undertaken for several months actually on the development of the site, including capacity at the site and all the various measures that are required for the housing and accommodation of asylum seekers.
Sheila Warren.
Thank you. Between 2015 and 2020, the yearly number of asylum applications stayed constant at about 30,000, but the proportion decided within 6 months, her target, plummeted from 80% to 17%, despite doubling the number of caseworkers. So isn't the truth that her asylum processing system is broken? Sending refugees to Rwanda will not fix that. And she is using those fleeing from the worst atrocities of war as a shield for her incompetence.
Deputy Speaker, the asylum system is completely broken. That is the only fact that she is correct on. I am changing the asylum system as per the Nationality and Borders Bill, which the Honourable Lady has voted against and every member opposite has voted against. This includes turning around asylum decision-making in a faster way, digitalisation of the process, but also making sure that the immigration courts and tribunals also hear more cases in faster time, which is the point that I made earlier on to a colleague in the House as well. And it's important that all these aspects of a reformed asylum system come together. She may shake her head. She shakes her head because, quite frankly, she's opposed to any reform or any controls on illegal migration and immigration.
Deputy Speaker,
Ever since this policy was announced over the bank holiday weekend, we've heard some very strong rhetoric from the opposition parties, leaning into some very lazy tropes about Africa and dripping in European exceptionalism. So can I ask my right honourable friend if she'll agree with me in condemning that kind of language when talking about Rwanda? And can I admonish her to keep the course on this, because when I was talking to my constituents over the weekend, the one phrase that everybody was using is "not before time."
I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I can refer to some of the undercurrents of the tone that has been used, not just in this House today, but more broadly around our partnership with Rwanda. Now, I could go as far to say that some of this is quite xenophobic, and quite frankly, I think it's deeply, deeply egregious. Rwanda is one of the fastest growing countries in Africa. We have an incredible partnership with them. They'll be hosts of the Commonwealth Heads of Government later on this year, and they are leading the way on the international stage on many, many international issues. And I actually think it is pretty distasteful. It says a great deal about members on the opposite benches, about their understanding of global Britain and internationalism.
George Howard.
So desperate.
Most recently, my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds Central, as have many others throughout this statement, asked for evidence that this policy could possibly work in some way or another. In each case, she declined to provide that evidence. So will she put in the library of the House of Commons all the advice she has received, internal government advice, on the legality, on the workability of the scheme, and also on the cost of the scheme? That way, at least we'll be able to assess what the evidence base is.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I actually refer to the comments I made earlier on in terms of the legal basis, the legislative basis, which was all put in place under the previous Labour government. And not only that, these schemes and this proposal was also looked at under the previous Labour government as well, which, had it have been operationalised back then, Madam Deputy Speaker, we may not be having this debate today, where more people would be claiming asylum in safe countries in the EU, and the people smuggling gangs would have been broken up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, and I believe the policy will work. Could my right honourable friend explain to the House what the successful implementation of her policy will look like on the ground, and in particular, what effect does she believe it will have on the numbers of vulnerable people willing to put their lives in the hands of ruthless people traffickers to gain illegal entry to our country?
Well, my honourable friend makes important points. One is actually in the policy working and the removal of people to Rwanda, and actually overcoming many of the obstacles and hurdles, some of which honourable colleagues have touched upon this afternoon, including legal barriers and many of the barriers that we face when it comes to the removal of those with no legal basis to be in the United Kingdom. The other point to make, Madam Deputy Speaker, is quite frankly the long-term impact and effect has to be to start disrupting that business model of the people smugglers, breaking up those evil people smuggling gangs and going after them with more prosecutions, making sure the pilots of those small boats are prosecuted in the way in which I explained earlier on in my statement. That takes not just a whole of government approach, it also means that we have to work with our international partners across Europe and even further afield.
Alison Toulis.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My Glasgow Central constituents want none of this despicable plan. As the chair of the all-party group in immigration detention, I went to visit Napier Barracks. It is not fit for purpose. It is cold, it is bleak, it is lacking in dignity and privacy. Vulnerable people struggle to get medical, social and legal support, but at least we could visit. Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Home Secretary tell me how facilities in Rwanda will be scrutinised, particularly when Human Rights Watch says that Rwanda has arbitrary detention, ill treatment and torture in official and unofficial detention facilities is commonplace.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd be delighted to tell the Honourable Lady how accommodation facilities in Rwanda and Kigali will be scrutinised. That is part of the monitoring work that the Home Office and technical officials have established, and it's part of the Memorandum of Understanding. That's if she had read the details in the MOU. The second point, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the Honourable Lady's characterisation of Napier is grossly wrong. And on top of that, and as we have as well, and she'll be very, very aware of the facilities that have been put in place in terms of recreation, leisure facilities, legal facilities, accommodation facilities, all the things that UK British taxpayers are paying for, and the cost of that is going up and up and up.
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that no one here would spend thousands of pounds to go to one country and end up in another, and that this policy will end up as a deterrent, and that will save lives and save the taxpayer money?
Well, my honourable friend actually is a voice of common sense on this, primarily because we want that deterrent effect. There's no question about that. And in addition to that deterrent effect, going after the individuals that, quite frankly, have been profiteering for decades and decades when it comes to the human misery, when it comes to people smuggling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that we know many Rwandans seek and are granted asylum here in the UK, how can the Home Secretary possibly tell the House with a straight face that Rwanda is a safe country to send people seeking asylum?
Home Secretary.
Well, I'm going to refer the Honourable Gentleman to the comments that I've made earlier about Rwanda. Rwanda is a safe country. I think the tone that he has applied to Rwanda as a country and our partnership is unjustifiably insulting. I'm going to leave my remarks there, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Craig McKinley.
Speaker, it would seem to me there are some who actively celebrate the porosity of the French border. That weakness has seen 28,000 irregular crossings, a huge number of deaths, appalling deaths, and a trade that is bigger than the drugs trade. Contrast that with my right honourable friend's new policy, which will actually normalise proper immigration rules, taking people to safe countries for proper processing in the right way. Can she understand my confusion that people are not celebrating this new policy?
Well, I thank my friend for his support and his comments. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier on, I do think the party opposite should just be honest about their position. They clearly stand for open borders. They do not believe in controlled immigration. We have a points-based immigration system which provides legal routes for people to come to the United Kingdom. They do not want the differentiation between legal and illegal routes. But I tell you who does, Madam Deputy Speaker, that's the British people.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When somebody is trafficked or smuggled into the UK and then determines that they don't want to be deported to Rwanda, what steps will she take to uphold their rights under the Refugee Convention?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier on in my remarks, first and foremost, there is a difference between trafficking cases and those that have been smuggled through the people smuggling routes. When it comes to cases that are trafficking, we have all the legal basis to provide support and also to go after the traffickers in terms of the abuses that they have committed, and she'll be very familiar with all of that. But not only that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I say it again, every case is determined case by case, and with that, of course, that means the right kind of legal support, both in this country and also in Rwanda.
David Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, people smuggling doesn't start at Calais. It can go through 5 different countries before it actually gets to Calais. Then we have the abhorrence of people drowning in the Channel. I understand the House's concerns over sending people to Rwanda. However, we have one champion in here, which sadly is not in his place at this moment in time. When he was the Shadow Secretary for DFID and became the Secretary for DFID, the Honourable Member for Sutton Coldfield did have a lot to do with Rwanda, and he's got the utmost respect from their government. Would my right honourable friend utilise his talents and use him in some ambassadorial way to make sure that it would allay the fears of the members of this House?
If I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend makes actually some very, very important points. particularly about the country of Rwanda, and those of us in this House that know Rwanda well. And I put that in the context of some of the ignorance that is being utilised and spoken about today, and actually about the incredible work of the Rwandan government through very difficult times, but more recently, how they have become almost Africa's voice on the international stage.
Ms. Matheson.
Can I challenge this lazy and probably sexist assumption that all young men are economic migrants? Does she not understand that in conflict situations, especially civil wars, whether it's Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Ethiopia, Sudan, one side will come to a town or a village and either press gang all the young men to fight for them or kill them, and then the other side will come in and do exactly the same. And what these young men are doing is not economic migrancy, but trying to flee from a war they want nothing to do with.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, of course, that is exactly why we are proposing safe and legal routes, as we've done with Syria, Afghanistan. These are bespoke routes that actually help those that are fleeing persecution. And there's an important point that he has made in there, which also means why our case-by-case approach on assessment when it comes to those seeking asylum is absolutely applied in the right kind of way. And the new plan for immigration and the National Anti-Borders Bill is trying to do exactly that by bringing efficacy to our asylum system to make sure that we can help those in genuine need.
Mayhew.
The EU uses Rwanda for refugee settlement. The United Nations uses Rwanda for refugee settlement. Even the Labour government legislated to use safe third countries to process asylum claims. Given this, does my right honourable friend agree that exactly the same approach lies behind this partnership with Rwanda?
Is absolutely right, and it goes without saying that, of course, it seems to be fine, depending on your political persuasion, to say it's fine for the EU, it's fine for the UN, but it's not fine for the British government. That is simply not acceptable. This has worked in the past, and I come back, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the fundamental principle that doing nothing is not an option. While people are drowning, not just in the Channel, but also in the Mediterranean, people are taking dangerous journeys, often through Libya, making difficult and dangerous crossings across the Mediterranean and then across the Channel. That is what we want to stop, and we have a moral duty to do everything we possibly can to break up that model.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, we know that 2/3 of migrants arriving by dangerous routes have a legitimate claim for asylum. But in respect of the remainder, can the Home Secretary please tell us what new agreement she has struck with the top 5 countries of origin of economic migrants in respect of returning migrants, improving visa application processes and tackling people smuggling at source?
Well, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, so tackling people smugglers at source is exactly what our country and government are leading on right now. And we're leading on that work with our intelligence and security partners, and also through law enforcement cooperation as well. And we're doing this through our EU near neighbours, so France, Belgium, the Netherlands, but also countries further upstream, including Italy and Greece. And it's right that we do that. And this is difficult work, and we are supporting them. My final comment, Madam Deputy Speaker, very much comes back to a question from the Honourable Lady, but also points made by others. In terms of speeding up processes, this is exactly what the National Anti-Borders Bill is about. It's making sure that we can speed up asylum claims, stop the merry-go-round of going to the courts and tribunals again and again and again, and ensure that we can bring efficacy to the asylum system.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome measures that will offer proper deterrence to those who are seeking to come to this country illegally. I also particularly welcome action to ensure that people are dispersed more fairly right across the country. Does my right honourable friend agree that for far too long areas like Stoke-on-Trent have taken far more than our fair share, and it's about time other parts of the country did their part?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I do just want to pay tribute to Stoke Council and to all parliamentary colleagues from Stoke-on-Trent. You've made the representation over a long period of time, many times, and with great strength and great feeling. The dispersal policy is important, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've touched on it already, but it is a complete and utter shame. I appreciate, the nationalists, have been howling about this policy, while at the same time, only one local authority has actually supported the dispersal policy. In the principle of fairness and a sense of fairness across the country and to British taxpayers, we must make sure that every local authority participates in this scheme.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I try to get a clear answer to the question that others have asked? The Home Office fact sheet on this proposal explains, quote, every person who comes to the UK illegally or by dangerous and unnecessary methods will be considered for relocation to Rwanda. And the Home Secretary seemed to confirm that in her earlier comments. So will she confirm now that women and children who come to the UK through irregular routes, fleeing conflict and repression, will be eligible for transfer to Rwanda, and not just the adult men, as her department briefed the media?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll repeat what I said earlier on, that decisions will be taken on a case-by-case basis, and nobody will be removed if it's unsafe or inappropriate for them.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, for this fantastic policy which people overwhelmingly supported when they voted for Brexit in 2016, and they overwhelmingly voted for the Conservative Party in Stoke-on-Trent for the first time across the board. Does she agree with me that it's about time that other local authorities did their bit, particularly in Scotland, and that the North Islington Wokarati are more than welcome to come to Stoke-on-Trent and explain why they oppose it? Perhaps they should send a member for Bury South to explain why.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's fair to say that my honourable friend has made a very, very powerful and compelling case for the dispersal policy, but equally as to why doing nothing is no longer an issue when it comes to reform of the asylum system, but also dealing with how we remove those individuals with no legal basis to be in the UK, particularly those that have travelled to the United Kingdom illegally through dangerous crossings who come from safe European countries.
Florence Ashlomi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I agree with the Right Honourable Member in that our asylum seeker is broken, and that £5 million costs is a cost too much, including the people that are staying in hotels in my constituency on South Lambeth Road, the many people I'm trying to help in terms of their asylum claim. So many people in Vauxhall have contacted me, they're worried about this policy. The FCO website states that Rwanda is not a safe place and it's frowned upon for people of LGBT. There are many LGBT people who claim asylum. Can the Home Secretary guarantee that those people will still be safe and not sent to a country where they could be at harm?
Absolutely we can, and that was part of our negotiation with the Rwandan government and has been very clear in the legal agreement that we have between us.
Butler.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the crucial point here is that the partnership with Rwanda is for people attempting to come to the UK illegally? And has she been struck, as I have, that despite the complaints, despite the carping, despite sometimes the caterwauling from the benches opposite, when it comes to proposing an alternative, a thought-through, a responsible plan, what is deafening is their silence?
Absolutely right, and Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll repeat what I said earlier on. It's the same party opposite that write letters to me frequently to stop us from removing people with no legal basis to be in the UK, including many foreign national offenders, rapists, murderers, paedophiles, you name it, along with asylum seekers. And that speaks volumes, it really, really does, when it comes to protecting our country and protecting British citizens.
Manira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Like me, the Home Secretary is the daughter of East African Indian immigrants whose family sought sanctuary and a better life in this country. So does she not feel, as I do, a personal moral responsibility to extend the generosity that was shown by the British government to our communities in the 60s and 70s by providing further safe and legal routes to the UK for refugees rather than shipping them off to Rwanda?
Deputy Speaker, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to safe and legal routes, I hope the Honourable Lady will vote with the government when it comes to the Nationality and Borders Bill, because that's exactly what this government is proposing. And as I've already said, 180,000 people have been brought to the United Kingdom under safe and legal routes, and this government is committed to doing much, much more.
That concludes this statement.